This is a very rare opportunity for you to see this. This is a very important academic ceremony that will be here held after the lecture. Thank you again, Mr. Barnier, for being with us. The floor is now yours.
Many thanks. Many thanks, dear Frank, ladies and gentlemen. It's not forbidden to speak French, no?
No.
Okay, not yet. Je vais d'abord m'exprimer.
So, first of all, I'll speak in my mother tongue, just so that it's clear for everyone that cultural diversity does matter, and it matters here in this chamber, the chamber of our European Parliament here in Brussels, which is, of course, the heart of European democracy. I'm extremely happy to welcome you here today for a number of reasons. And I'm very happy to congratulate you on being here and seeing so many of you here from so many different campuses with your teaching team as well, to work on a subject which is, of course, very important, the priority of the new Commission President, Ursula von der Leyen. Now, I'm going to talk to you about what I think about Brexit and the negotiations, which I'm heading on behalf of the European Union, of course. This is the subject where I have added value for you in terms of what I think, but I would, of course, been happy to talk to you about climate change. And I think in our political camp I was one of the first people to raise the importance of the subject. Of course, I was the French Minister of the Environment, and I published 4 or 5 works on the subject. I'm extremely happy for all of those reasons that Madame von der Leyen is driving the European Commission, and I hope the Member States as well, to make the European continent really at the forefront of the fight against climate change, which for me is the most serious of the challenges before us, and it's that which will change everything, and it will change the way we live much, much more than we think, in terms of transport, in terms of dangers, in terms of the way that we work. For example, you see simply bringing the wine harvesting season changing. It was a number of weeks a few years ago. This change, of course, is fundamental. It needs to drive us not just to saving things like energy, but of course into the creation of a circular economy, and one way or another to reduce our emissions. So I congratulate you for choosing this challenge as your collective hurdle. Now, I left the Paris school back in '72. It's a little bit of a while ago now. There was a referendum in our country at the time. The President of the Republic called it, and the subject was completely new for French citizens, and it was a European subject. It was the first time that the people were consulted for a European matter, and the question was, will you accept, as a member of the European Economic Committee, which is now called the EU, of course, 4 countries: the United Kingdom, Ireland, Denmark, and Norway. Now, I mean, at the time it wasn't forbidden to be an ESCP student and a politician. And I was in politics. I was with the Young Gaullists, and at the time I campaigned for the yes vote. regardless, that is, of the reservations that General de Gaulle had for the UK joining. Now, I campaigned for yes. It was the yes rather that won, and I've never regretted that throughout my political career. At the time, on the school on Avenue de la République was really quite egalitarian. There was only one woman in our class, in the cohort, and she was much less European at the start than she was at the end, thanks to the students, the various managers, and all of the initiatives which took place. The school, of course, has become much more European as well, with campuses in Paris, London, Berlin, Madrid, Turin and Warsaw. And I sometimes tell myself that my degree must be worth more today than it was. Now, throughout the whole Brexit negotiation process, of course, I've been interviewed a number of times, and I was once asked a question which I later learnt was ironic. And he said, you've explained to us that you spent 3 years negotiating an agreement with the United Kingdom, so now why are you starting new negotiations? So I explained that during the 3 years of negotiations, first of all with Theresa May, and then with Boris Johnson, we endeavoured to address the separation. And Brexit is a divorce. And in the divorce, as in any separation, there are, of course, consequences, which were generally poorly explained and underestimated. All divorces create consequences, insecurity and instability on a legal level. And here, of course, because it's quite a serious divorce, leaving the European Union, of course, this shows that the EU isn't a prison. You can leave, but there are many consequences for many different people. And what you see here on the slide are the subjects that, with the British, for the last 3 years, we've endeavoured and found solutions, legal solutions, where the potential divorce created legal uncertainty. So to go into this, first of all, for citizens, surely some of you in the room, 4.5 million people. There are 3.5 million Europeans who live, work and study in the United Kingdom, and 1.5 million British people who live, work and study in other countries of the EU. Now, the British have not yet ratified the text, but they guarantee the rights, social rights and residency rights of the European nationals, for them, for their families and for their entire lives. All rights that were acquired or will be acquired up until the end of this year, 2020. We also found a solution to the budget. A European budget is a 7-year budget, unlike a national or local budget, so it causes always, of course, some difficulty, and it's always difficult to get all the countries to agree, as we saw last week in Brussels. But everyone has to agree on the policies and then the budget to service those policies. So the 2021 to 2028 budget. Back in 2014, there was a budget which was agreed, and the British agreed to pay for 12 to 14% of the total budget as a net contributor. Now, this is true. The British accepted to stick with their obligations, and we therefore determined that everything that needed to be paid for by 28 countries would be paid for by 28 countries. We had to, of course, discuss Ireland. No one has managed to show me what is the added value of Brexit, even Mr. Farage. But where you see Brexit having its most serious consequences, and where the risk is the highest, is in Ireland, because in Ireland it's not simply a question of exchange of goods or customs controls. It's about people, it's about men and women, and it's about peace that they have finally found after the conflict in Northern Ireland, which ended only 20 years ago and killed 3,700 people. And we have a very complex series of negotiations with Boris Johnson to make sure that no hard border on the island of Ireland appears. A hard border between that part of the United Kingdom, which is Northern Ireland, and the Republic of Ireland. That the conditions protecting the single market will be maintained to ensure that there is a proper customs checks of goods moving into of Northern Ireland, but ensuring that, of course, Northern Ireland can stay in the customs zone of the United Kingdom. And what we needed to do was to unweave 47 years of integration, which have been slowly built with the United Kingdom as a member state, and, of course, to make sure that they were unweaved in an orderly manner and not simply ripped apart, which would have been extremely serious for citizens, for Ireland, and would engender a series of awful consequences. We planned for a transitional period, which means that the UK has left the institutions as it wanted to. The UK no longer has MEPs, there is no longer a European Commissioner, there are no longer any ministers in the Council of Ministers. But for a while, and until the end of 2020 this year, this was a decision that was taken 2 years ago. So, in fact, the transition period, which should have been 2 years and is now only 10 months, the UK will remain in the single market and the customs union and benefit from all European policies, as well as be bound by their obligations. So, the 2-year, now 10-month transition period is very serious, because the British Prime Minister has told us, and told us again and again, that he will not request any extension to the transition period, which of course is possible, and he would like that transitional period to end at the end of this December. So on the 31st of December, regardless of what happens, the United Kingdom will also leave the single market and the customs union. And this is what Mr Johnson also repeated to Ursula von der Leyen, with all of the consequences that will stem from that. So we have to make the best possible use of the short period that we have in front of us. First of all, to properly implement the withdrawal agreement and make sure that's precise and rigorous. This is really a question of trust. We've signed and ratified an international treaty. It needs to be properly implemented in all of its provisions. And, of course, with particular attention paid to Ireland. We also need to prepare ourselves for what will happen on the 31st of December, because regardless of what we agree between now and then, there will be definitive changes. All goods coming from the UK, just as they do from China or the United States, will need to be checked at the border of the single market to protect, of course, consumers and to protect businesses. So those checks will be put into place. The Netherlands have recruited some 700 customs officials, France a similar number, Belgium 400. And in that same time period, in that very short amount of time, we also need to conduct a second set of negotiations. And I spoke yesterday, of course, with heads of state. We now have a mandate which has been given to us by heads of state and by the Parliament. And really what is at stake is unchanged. We still need to come to an agreement with the United Kingdom. It's going to be difficult, it's going to be complicated, and we don't have much time to do it. And to do this, we base ourselves on on a document which goes hand in hand with the withdrawal agreement. And you can see it here on the slide as the pillars of an ambitious partnership. And this was the wording agreed with Boris Johnson. This is the political declaration which deals not just with economic issues, now I'll speak in English, but also about the security partnership. It's a partnership which goes much, much beyond trade in goods. It needs to deal with services, investment, transport, energy. We also need to deal with future relationships between European universities that we support in terms of research and development. We need to continue the Erasmus programme in some form of another. So these are the topics which are at the heart of the economic and social partnership. And then, of course, there's internal security and foreign policy.
No longer in the 17th, when the main purpose of trade agreements was to take down tariff walls. A modern trade agenda is about more than boosting economic exchanges and commercial opportunities. Modern trade is sustainable trade. Modern trade is sustainable trade. It's about ensuring high standards from social or environmental to health and safety. This is even more true with a very close partner like the UK, with whom we should develop a common ambition. And how credible would we be going into the next COP26 meeting, for instance, in Glasgow, if our future agreement allows businesses to cut corners on environmental and social rights for the sake of gaining market shares? Of course, we have heard Prime Minister Boris Johnson's assurances that the UK would never engage in a race to the bottom, that it would not seek to undermine European standards, that the UK would in fact maintain higher standards than the EU. And, to be frank, we are ready to believe this. In fact, I do not believe that the UK will become some sort of Singapore on Thames. But that means it should not be a problem for the UK to agree on a number of ground rules. And I want to be very, very clear. We understand that the UK wants its own rule book. We respect that choice, the UK's sovereignty choice. That was the whole point of leaving the EU. However, there are not two ways about it. Every preferential trade agreement sets terms and conditions for opening up markets. The logic is simple. If you are a member of the EU, you get frictionless access to a market of 450 million consumers. If you have no preferential trade agreement with the EU, you get access like any third countries under the standards of the WTO regime. And if you are somewhere in between, you get something in between. But there is no single template. There was never, and there will never be a single template. The UK says it wants Canada, but the problem with that is that the UK is not Canada. Let me just try to give the proof of what I said with this slide showing the crossing between the volume of the trade with many third countries and the proximity of the distance with these these third countries. A flight from Brussels to London takes 70 minutes. A flight from Brussels to Ottawa takes over 10 hours. EU 27 trade with Canada reached 55 billion euro in 2018. That sounds like a lot, but our trade with the UK was worth well over 500 billion euro, nearly 10 times more. And this slide is once again very clear. So, of course, our deals with Canada or with other countries give us reference points, but we need to tailor them to the reality of our relationships, and we always do with all our partners. Dear friends and ladies and gentlemen, we are ready to offer to the UK super preferential access to our markets, a level of access that would be unprecedented for a third country, unprecedented. And this with a direct competitor that is right on our doorstep. Is this really something we can do without firm guarantees that the UK will respect the level playing field and avoid unfair competitive advantages? The answer, I am afraid, is simple. We cannot. We want competition in the future, but it must be fair. Fair and free. Free and fair. That is why we are asking that the EU and the UK lay down together a number of rules building on our current high standards in specific areas. State aid, environmental protection, and the fight against climate change, social and labour rights, and taxation issues. This way, we will make sure that somewhere down the road, perhaps in years to come, neither side will use unfair subsidies, nor grant derogations on industrial emissions or on labour standards to win industries from the other. Because this would not just create unfair competition, it would also cause damage to the environment, and it would harm EU and UK workers. The simple fact is that a modern and sustainable trade policy requires ground rules. Dear friends, in the ongoing debate, the UK is insisting a lot on its own sovereignty, on its sovereign power to set its own rules for its own benefits, to define its own budget, to secure its own borders, to conclude its own trade deals, and to set its own standards. Let me, on this point also, be very, very clear. Nobody contests any of this. Nobody. Of course, we respect the UK's sovereignty. Of course, we respect its choices. But it is not just a point of philosophy. It is also a question of pragmatism. Firstly, because as of January 2021, there will be practical changes in every domain, as I said before. In very important areas such as trade, transport, energy, and mutual security. Many of these changes will be mechanical, automatic, because of Brexit. So we will need to rebuild the relationship, one that is different to what we had done before, because the UK is no longer a member state. In this context, the more the UK seeks to distance itself from the common framework of rules we have built together during the last 47 years, over the years, the more our relationship will be distant across sectors. Secondly, it is a question of pragmatism, because international cooperation, whether economic or security driven is always based on a degree of rule sharing, resource pooling, and common governance. This is not about giving up sovereignty. It is not about losing control. It is about using your sovereignty to further the interests of your country. During its 47 years of membership, the UK built up a privileged position in a number of strategic areas. In great part, this was made possible by the fact that the UK was an EU member state within the single market. But the UK has decided to leave the single market, the customs union, and all the EU international agreements, 600 international agreements, mechanically, automatically. It no longer wishes to participate to our common ecosystem of rules, supervision, or enforcement mechanisms. This choice will have consequences as of the 1st 2021, even if we reach a deal with the UK on our relationship. And allow me to be more concrete, to give to you 3 concrete examples. First of all, regarding imports from the UK. On the 1st January 2021, whatever the outcome of the negotiation, there will be checks and controls on all UK goods entering the single market as they are for any third country. These checks are particularly important given the UK's position as a major entry point in the single market. And as part of these checks, we will need to pay the greatest attention to the rules of origin that we will put in our trade agreement. Of course, we love made in Britain, of course. But we must have guarantees that the goods we import from the UK, tariff and quota-free, really are British. We cannot take the risk that the UK becomes a kind of assembly hub for goods from all over the world, allowing them to enter the single market as British goods. This is the first example. The second one is about financial services. As of the 1st January 2021, UK firms will lose the benefit of the financial services passport. Indeed, no firm from a country outside the single market has such a passport. This means that UK financial services firms will no longer be able to offer their services in all EU member states based on their UK authorizations. And those UK financial institutions that want to continue working in all certainty across the single market, know that they can establish themselves in one of the 27 EU member states. It is a possibility. For the rest, in a number of sectors, such as the area of credit rating agencies, the EU will have the possibility to grant equivalences. We will do so when it is in the interest of the EU, our financial stability, our investors, and our consumers. But these equivalences will never be global nor permanent, nor will they be subject to joint management with the UK. They are and will remain unilateral decisions. I read in the Financial Times recently that London must retain its primacy as a hub for wholesale financial markets without becoming a rule taker of the European Union and European regulation. As a former commissioner in charge of financial services, allow me to question that. We accept that the profits stay in London while the EU carries the risks. Ladies and gentlemen, the UK may not want to be a rule taker, okay, but we do not want to be the risk taker. When the next financial crisis strikes, who will foot the bill? I doubt the UK will foot it for the EU. That is why the EU must take the responsibility for its financial regulation, supervision, and its financial stability. This is the second example. And the third and last one is about the authorization and certification of goods for circulation in the EU single market. As of the 1st January next year, as a third country, the UK will no longer be able to grant marketing authorizations for instance, pharmaceuticals or types approval for cars for the EU market. In other sectors, too, the EU cannot accept to be reliant on a third country that is no longer participating in the internal market for key regulatory, supervisory and certification tasks, especially when we are talking about very large volumes, and even more so when we are talking about critical products such as medical devices. Aside from possible supply risks, this would raise enforcement issues. This is why this function must be carried out in the EU in the future. Voilà, je voudrais...
So, I'll finish very shortly, and I apologise for keeping your attention, but these are, of course, complex subjects and complex negotiations, of course. When I was preparing this speech, I was reminded of something that Franklin Roosevelt, a very great president, said, which was...
has been shown to be useful up to a certain point and no further, but cooperation, which is the thing we must strive for today, begins where competition leaves off. Pour moi, chers amis,
so for me, dear friends, there is no doubt whatsoever that what we need to do is rebuild an ambitious partnership with the United Kingdom. Regardless of our regrets of seeing the UK leave the EU, it remains there. It is near to us. It's a partner and a friend as well as an ally. And we need to build a partnership in so many areas, very specific, very tangible areas for many European citizens, such as air connectivity. The UK is leaving the Single Skies Agreement, so we need a replacement for that. Of course, road freight transport as well, finding another way than Euratom to cooperate in the peaceful use of nuclear energy. A second example there. As well as establishing new arrangements to ensure the rights of mobility and residence of both sets of citizens. And, of course, we'll be looking very closely at the new British immigration policy, which will be very different from it was before. And, of course, we will accept no discrimination in terms of our nationals. Now, I cited Roosevelt. I could have cited Churchill by saying that cooperation requires agreement on common rules. It needs a common and strong governance framework. It's true not just for the economy or for security, which, of course, are two pillars of our future relationship. The world is changing very, very quickly and much quicker than certain politicians believe. I think that the EU, as well as the UK, must continue to cooperate on common challenges. Sometimes we see them outside the EU, in Africa, in the Sahel, and sometimes within our democracies. We've seen it with terrorism, with cyber attacks, organised crime, money laundering, and we need to find a way to work with the United Kingdom to find a common framework to ensure the security of our citizens. There can be no trade-off between trade and security. The UK is a third country outside Schengen. It will no longer be affected by free movement of people, but we'll need to find new cooperation mechanisms on, again, very concrete examples such as extradition, the arrest warrant, passenger data exchange and data protection, the sharing of sometimes very personal information such as DNA profiles. these are subjects that we need to discuss, and we need to ensure that if we were to continue to share data with the UK, that the European citizens' data would be properly respected. We need to, and this can only happen if the UK continues to apply the European Convention on Human Rights, as well, of course, continues to guarantee adequate data protection standards. For this, we also need to ensure there's an effective dispute resolution mechanism. It's extremely important for us to find cooperation in common security and foreign policy. The UK is a huge partner here in terms of dissuasive military might. The UK is also a huge player. So we have myriad reasons to continue to work with the UK. We're ready to do so if the United Kingdom desires. But I do have one worry. The negotiations start next Monday afternoon. We'll open a dozen or so negotiation tables to discuss the various things in such a short time as Boris Johnson has discussed. And we see ministerial declarations coming out of the UK, and we see a distancing in what's being said, moving back from what was said in the political declaration and in the withdrawal agreement, where promises were made, promises to cooperate with us, to make sure there's no form of unfair competition. And our concern is that the text in the political declaration needs to be properly respected and implemented to the letter in a legal framework. Of course, we're determined to find a good agreement. Our responsibility is to citizens and to businesses of the European Union. We are going to be very rational. We will keep our eyes open. We'll see if there's an agreement at the end of the end of the year, and the changes which will take place, as I said, border control, we could well be bolstered by other frictions, taxes and quotas, etc. Now, I just wanted to end with a more personal and less political note. There's a reason for us to be together. Now, if we could just go back to the first slide. There we go. We'll have the first slide first and not both of them. Otherwise, the demonstration doesn't work. So, now, the slide's got a story behind it. It was David Cameron who published this. I'm sure you remember him. Now, when I was Commissioner for the Internal Market, he published a document to show the importance of being together rather than being alone. And it was to support my work on the single market. And this is the updated slide now, which shows one thing. Individually, countries are simply pushed off the table. And I've used this data to show what happens when we stay together, supporting the single market, which of course is the starting block for everything, and then what happens when we are alone. Dear friends, remember what I'm saying, which is the geo-economic, geopolitical context in which Brexit is happening, and this is where the British have chosen to be alone rather than be together. And if we think about it now, I'm convinced for France, for Germany, for all countries, if you're pushed off the table where all the other big countries, we say emerging countries, but of course one moment they will emerge or another, and simply because they are so big, they're so populous, they have so many natural resources, they are at the table. And if we want to stay at the table, and even here you see that's not certain, but if we want to stay at the table, we have to remain together. We have to remain together as European patriots if we want to defend our values, if we want to make sure that we are deciding in the order of the world. We need to remain together. Otherwise, we are simply stripped of influence and any say. And I say this to make sure that my country and the continent that we're on does not end up in that situation. I hope I've been clear. I saw a drawing in the newspaper Le Monde the other day, and I think you can see it here on the screen. And I don't think Plantu was particularly right, but there we go. I will be happy to answer any questions you have. Thank you.
Dear Michel, what a fantastic masterclass for our ESCP students. Thank you for explaining the context, explaining the transition phase of only 10 months now, and also for explaining how we need to be getting prepared as EU citizens for an ambitious partnership, you said, with fair and free competition. Before we get into the Doctor Honoris Causa ceremony, there will be now a phase of questions. I know that Michel loves this interaction with you, with students, and it's going to be led by Yves Toncini, who's been coordinating this seminar outstandingly. Thank you, Yves.
Thank you, Mr. Dean. Thank you all. Thank you, Michel Barnier, for this presentation. We have given the time frame, some questions from the audience accepted. So I'm going to ask you to raise your hand, the volunteer to ask a question, to raise your hand, and then I'm going to pick the volunteers. And once I will pick the volunteer, I will ask him or her to stand up so that the microphone can be open and the questions expressed. So, the first one, the bravest one, this one, yes, please stand up. No, I will take 3 questions, please. So, 3 questions, okay. Yeah. Center, right and left. So please stand up, number 449. Sorry, I don't call your name. Please ask your question. You have 1 minute maximum. It's a question. The floor is yours.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Mr. Barnier, for being here. First, I think I speak on behalf of every ESCP student today. I was just wondering if during your negotiations with the parties...
Just tell me, who are you?
Yeah, sorry. Let me maybe briefly introduce myself. My name is Nathan Simoni. I'm an ESCP student, M1 student at ESCP. And I was just wondering if there was something, maybe, that struck you or surprised you, maybe in a good way, in the negotiation that you held, something that you didn't expect during the negotiation you had with the UK parties. Thank you.
Thank you. Then the second question from the left side, please. The same, give your name. And go ahead.
Cool. Hello, Mr. Barnier. My name is Oscar. I'm a M1 student at ESCP. You mentioned the fact that, in your opinion, the British government is distanciating from the agreement you led under the EU mandates, especially on the Irish subject. And I would like to ask you, do you believe it is likely that a United Ireland, like a referendum, could happen in the following years, and that Northern Ireland might rejoin the EU throughout a United Ireland? Thank you.
Well, then a third question from the right side, and then we'll have a last one in the center again. No lady at this stage. Go ahead, please. I hope they see you because it's difficult to be seen from here. Please go ahead.
No, okay. Sorry. It's it's me. Sorry. Dear Mr. Barnier, thank you very much for your speech. I want to thank you for all the ESCP students. And I would like just to ask you a question. I don't want to be too long, the answer, of course, because it's a difficult one, maybe. But I want to ask you, between the 1973, when Britain and the UK joined the EU, with also your collaboration throughout the process, and what you think, something like 3 examples of what changes between what had changed between then and now, and 2016, of course, the Brexit and the EU leaving our European Union.
Could you please elaborate a bit more or rephrase your question?
Okay, I know it's a difficult one. I would just like to ask 3 things that you think that changed between 1973 and 2016. So, what brought United Kingdom to leave the European Union on a on a bigger picture aspect, on the world picture aspect?
This is done. Okay, we got it. Last but not least, please.
Sorry, how does it work? Oh. Hello, so my name is Jack. Thank you for your speech. I'm from ESCP. Obviously, first year. I want to ask a question about the contribution. Obviously, one big problem is when the UK is going to leave the European Union, there's going to have a big problem of contribution for the European Union. So my question is, let's say you impose a tax that is over 4 years of budget of the UK. How are you going to contribute the gap for the revenue of the EU after that? What's your plan to do so after they have contributed for the next 4 years of their budget? What happens next? Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, Mr. Barnier, 4 questions and then 4 answers expected. Good luck.
I will try to answer telegraphically to each of these questions. I will be very brief on the second one. Oscar, where are you? Because I always listen to everybody, not only from Northern Ireland, but also from Scotland. I met last Monday the First Minister of Scotland in my office, but I do not want to intervene in the national debate with the UK. So you cannot ask to me and question about what could be the evolution in the UK debate. I don't want to intervene. I don't want to be involved in any national debate. I respect the UK. We negotiate with the UK government only. I listen to everybody, but I don't want to be involved in the national debates. And as far as Ireland is concerned, my only goal has been and will remain to find the way, and we have found a way with Boris Johnson in this agreement, to solve the cycles, if I may say, the 4 issues we have to solve in the same time: all island economy, no border, integrity of the custom union of the UK, and no border. We always worked and we found this solution respecting the institutional order of the UK, and I will continue. I'm sorry to disappoint you, but I don't want to intervene. The budget, the UK until the beginning and since the beginning until the end of this year is and has been a net contributor, 10 billion per year. That means that starting from the next pluriannual perspective beginning next year. The UK is no longer there. We have to find a way to cover this budget. It's not it is 1% of the GDP. It's many billions, but it's only 1%. We have to cover the needs to finance the policies, even the new policies in this framework, and there is a huge and very difficult debate. Probably, obviously, this debate is a little bit more difficult this year because the UK is no longer there. But if I speak frankly with you, this debate has never been easy, never. And if you look at the newspaper 7 years ago, it was exactly the same kind of huge and conflict and difficulty between the net contributors and the net beneficiaries, and so. But the gap is this one: 10 billion per year. Huh? So I think that the Commission is working on. We have to convince the member state step by step to face all these policies and to finance these policies, and also perhaps to change the structure itself of the budget with new proper resources. Huh? This is the challenge today. What change that can explain what happened in the UK? It's clear that the UK joined 47 years ago, not really for the same reasons that the founding countries. Huh? They joined, if I remember clearly the speeches of the Prime Minister at that moment, for economic and trade reasons. It was the main reason to join the single market, the common market at that time, and to trade with us more easily. Okay. But for us, perhaps not for all the UK leaders, the EU is not only a supermarket. The supermarket is much more than a market or free trade zone. With the UK, we have built along this period a real, what I can call an ecosystem between the 28 member states, which is much more than a free trade zone. Common standards, common norms, common rights for the consumers, common regulations, common supervision, and on top of everything, a common jurisdiction, the Court of Justice. This is a single market. And it is the main reason why Mr. Trump, on one side, or the Chinese president, respect us. Because a Chinese firm or US companies entering in Slovenia or in France or in Netherlands, respecting the rules, the standards, accepting the supervision, the regulations, the role of the Court of Justice. If these conditions are reached, this firm, Chinese or US, enter in a market of 400 of until now 500 million consumers immediately, automatically. This is our main asset. This is the reason why we never accepted to negotiate, to compromise on the single market. And we will never do that, never. We will never accept to unravel or fragilize the single market, never. The single market is not for negotiation. Huh? So having saying that, if you look at the reasons of the Brexit, there are obviously specific British reasons, as we can find in France, for instance, specific French reasons. If you listen to the souverainist on the left side, Mr. Mélenchon, or on the right side, Mrs. Le Pen. But if I may, this question is very important. Apart the very specific British reasons, there are a common popular sentiment a popular feeling in the many British regions, the Midlands and some others, where what is behind the Brexit is a social anger, if I speak frankly. The feeling that the EU does not protect the citizens, the feeling of abandon, to be abandoned, face the globalizations. And as a politician, my recommendation is, apart the consequences of the Brexit, and we try to deal with the consequences, we have to take the time to listen, to understand, and to answer to this popular feeling. It's too late for the British regions, it's not too late for the European regions, where you find today exactly the same popular sentiment. And don't confuse the popular sentiment with a populism. The populism use the social anger. So we have to answer, and to be more optimistic, there are solutions, there are answers at the local level, for agriculture, for the public services, for the public health, for the transportation, at the national level, to have an industrial ambition, and at the European level. And what is clear that the new President of the Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, in her first decisions, has understood that we have to answer. This is my answer to the questions. What has created some surprise? The terms of the Brexit were very clear from the very beginning. Huh? They want to leave, okay. A surprise was the fact that the Prime Minister was not able to reach a majority to get the vote 3 times of our own majority before the election of Boris Johnson. It was a surprise for us. A surprise, not so much, but reality is also the very end of my meeting with Mr. Farage. I just want to tell you what was at that time my last question to Mr. Farage as his answer. At the end of this meeting, once again, it's very stimulating. I asked to Mr. Farage, you were on the front line of the Brexit campaign. You want to get Brexit. Okay, we are going to deliver the Brexit. Okay. What is, Mr. Farage, your vision? How do you see, after the Brexit, the relation between the EU and the UK? What is your vision? And his answer was very clear and immediate. Mr. Barnier, after the Brexit, the EU will no longer exist. So that means that this leader and some others want to destroy us. I'm not speaking of the current British government. I'm speaking of a certain number of people behind the Brexit campaign. They want to destroy the EU. And we are not obliged to give them the point. So we have to react, as I answered to the previous questions, and we have to be careful and to protect ourselves also. So today, I have not yet surprised. Perhaps a point of concern, which is the distance that the British government want to put between its previous commitments with us and the current speeches on the political declarations and on the implementation of the withdrawal agreement. But we have to check this point in the next few days and weeks. It's over? Yes. No? We have to respect the time. So, thank you very much.
So, ladies and gentlemen, before we go into the next part of the ceremony, I'm asking you to stand for the European anthem. Ladies and gentlemen, dear students, it is time now for me to present the honoris causa degree that is going to be presented to Michel Barnier. As the words suggest, it is a degree, and a very formal one, in the highest order of importance, awarded to personalities with honourable achievements. And this is a degree, and as you will see in a few moments, when the insignia will be presented to Michel Barnier by the Dean of Faculty, to my left, there will be 3 rows, 3 bands. The first band refers to the first academic degree, the bachelor. The second row represents the second rank of academic achievement, the master's degree. And the third rank represents the higher degree of the doctorate. And the doctorate honoris causa is awarded because of very special achievements by individuals that have something very special and that have a special link with a university or with a higher education institution. ESCP has not been delivering many of them. Less than a dozen. Former president of this parliament, Madame Nicole Fontaine, also German President Hans-Gert Pöttering, distinguished business leaders like Jeff Immelt, CEO of General Electric, Sunil Mittal, also CEO of the Bharti company, a great entrepreneur and business leader, and also French Prime Minister Jean-Pierre Raffarin. It's a small number of distinguished people who have a special role for their achievements. The first doctorates honoris causa in the world were awarded back in 1773 by Harvard, Cambridge. In France, it started only after the end of World War I, and in other countries also with various degrees. But they are here across the international community to express gratitude for services rendered to science, arts, humanities, political science, and management. And this is what we are doing today in awarding this degree to an outstanding alumnus who has been at least 4 times a minister in France and also a member of parliament at a very young age. Maybe I'm wrong, Michel, but I recall it's around the age of 27 years that you got elected. And then, of course, a leading politician, several times also European Commissioner for Regional Policy. You said during your speech in charge also as a European Commissioner for Internal Market and Services. And in 2016, July 2016, you were designated as the European Commission's chief negotiator with the United Kingdom over leaving the European Union under Article 50 of the Treaty on European Union. Can European life be more diverse and active than yours? The Senate of the school considered that you do incarnate the European spirit, and not as a Frenchman, but as a prominent European citizen and politician. And as such, we are all proud here, being assembled, to see you become, again, for the second time, a graduate of ESCP, once in 72, and again in 2020. This is a great occasion for us, with your presence today, where you really sent a lot of messages to the students. And you are in many ways a leadership role model for them. As ESCP has changed, you're right, you said, but there are still very strong skills and qualities for leaders of tomorrow that you display. And I will only take 4 very short examples of what we want to do in a business school like ESCP for the future. Because you are here, a breed of future leaders, and I hope some of you will be achieving as much as Michel has done. Vision and a helicopter view. I know that, Michel, you mentioned frequently the necessity to look at problems globally with a systems approach, looking towards the horizon. I think it's an expression you like, rather than looking at only short-term problems with myopia. Project management with complexities. You said, and you showed with some of your slides, and you said also, and we hear you talk also a lot about project management, because projects federate energies when ideas tend to divide people. Also, something that we feel is of extreme importance for leaders of tomorrow is energy and resilience. You have demonstrated a lot of this across the years, and in particular during this special role as chief negotiator for the preparation and conduct of the negotiations with the UK. During 3 good years between October 2016 and 2019, you have been under the limelight of the press and the medias. Now, maybe a little secret, at ESCP, we gathered, collected everything that came out, and it goes from meetings with David Davis and all sorts of comments in the international press. And this is important for leaders, energy and resilience. Lastly, the sense of duty and of European values, which are very dear to your heart and very dear also to the ESCP community. You show the way in terms of putting forward the common good always before specific interests. And I liked it very much when you mentioned this fair and free competition. Who better than you could have been more legitimate to make a keynote speech like this in this hemicycle? We could go on because the Senate of the school had a long list of reasons to award this doctorate honoris causa today. But at least for those reasons that I have given today, we are pleased now to award you the degree and title. There are 2 things. There is the degree and there is the title of Doctor Honoris Causa of ESCP. And within seconds from now, Michel will be getting the degree from the hands of the academic dean of the school, Professor Leyen Laluza, and will be receiving the insignia in red, because originally management derives from the legal sciences, from the hands of the Dean of Faculty, Professor Valérie Moati. And as this is going to be done, and as the 3 rows of academic distinction will be put and placed on Michel's shoulder, I will be renewing congratulations and I hope a large round of applause. Thank you.
Voilà, vous allez mettre ça là, vous allez me la mettre. Hein. Voilà, très bien, merci beaucoup.
Alors peut-être décalez-vous un peu par là, parce qu'il y aura le Parlement derrière.
Congratulations again.
Chers amis,
Dear friends, now, I made you sit and listen to a long speech before about Brexit and a number of European reflections. Now, I'm not going to steal your attention again for too long, but I just want to say that from the bottom of my heart, I'm really moved by this distinction that you have awarded me, and thank you very much for taking the decision. I was extremely surprised. I mean, I didn't even complete a doctoral thesis. So, I mean, being the doctoris honoris causa after so many other important personalities, it's extremely moving indeed. Thank you very much for this diploma. And it might be recognition, but more than that, I think it's encouragement. Earlier on, I spoke about when I was elected. In fact, I've been elected almost my entire life. I'm from the most beautiful canton in France, from Val d'Isère and Bourg Saint-Maurice. I would encourage you all to go there and go skiing. And a few years later, I was elected as an MP, and I was the youngest member of the National Assembly, but you do lose that title quite quickly. And then a little bit later, in 1992, I was invited to the beautiful office of the Paris Chamber of Commerce. And the first, it was an insignia, not a diploma, but the first insignia that I received was from the ESCP, and that was 20 years after I left the school, back in 72. In 92, of course, it was the Olympic Games. And I remember that giving these diplomas, giving them to young men and women like you. In fact, I thought it was interesting, because the moment where I left the school, these people weren't even born. But throughout a career, and a life is a career of sort, but I've tried to keep the same level of enthusiasm and also the same level of indignation as when I was elected for the first time when I was 22. And I would call upon all of you to retain your capacity for enthusiasm and indignation. So it's not because I have this diploma honoris causa that I can give you any lessons, but I can perhaps share with you some experience. I spent 10 years of my life organising the 16th Winter Olympic Games in Albertville. It was an amazing adventure. 10 years. I was told that it was good training for Brexit. But there are two things that I recall that I'd like to share with you today from those 10 years of organising the Olympic Games. It was the biggest event that France had organised for a very long time. Of course, it was the Olympic Games. But I remembered one thing, that all of those who took part in the Games, regardless of what they did, but I'm thinking, for example, of the 8,000 volunteers, all of them felt that they made personal progress by taking part in some collective success. And I think that all of you here will either start businesses or lead businesses. If you haven't done already, you will move into government or governance, and you'll be part of a team, and every team, regardless of how big it is, needs to know their place, but work in the team and feel like they're making progress personally, and be better on a personal level by bringing their play to the table, by carrying their own stone. The President said that it's the moral of action. There needs to be collective feeling, a collective morale in a team, regardless of how big it is. And you also have to raise your horizons, personally, professionally, in terms of civic duty. There are always problems. Sometimes there are difficulties, sometimes there are crises. There's no magic wand to make them go away. You can't click your fingers and have no more problems. But what I've seen since the Olympic Games and through my public life is when you put problems into perspective, when you've got something above your eyes, when you're looking at something on the horizon, instead of seeing nothing, problems, of course, they're not simply wiped out with a swish of a magic wand, but they are much less difficult. And putting things into perspective really allows you to take a step back. It allows you to compare difficulties, to put them into perspective, and to see where you're going properly. And that's a much better solution than simply turning in on oneself and getting too worked up over the problem. Again, I'd like to thank you. You should all be truly proud of being part of this school. It's a wonderful European school. You should be proud of being European. You should stay curious. You should never become blasé. Be curious about people, about countries, about places. And I think you should also retain, regardless of where you get to in your life, you should retain that capacity for personal progress. Today, I'm 69 years old, and I've always said, and I'm still saying, I'm making progress. Wow. I know that there's progress still to be made, and I will carry on. Thank you very much to everyone.
Now we leave you, thank you again, and we leave you now in the good hands of Yves Battoncini, and a great seminar to you all.
And to make it even more memorable, we're going to have a collective photo, so please stand up, we join you, and we'll have a photo with Michel Barnier in a moment.
Okay, please take your place. Big smile. Be ready. Okay, let's go.